So what's the point of marriage? Who's getting married? So what do you think the point of marriage is? Because I ask every couple in marriage prep, what's the point of marriage? And no one gets it right. But you guys will tonight. No pressure. I see big things over there, man. You got this. That sounds like the point of sex. No, seriously, I mean, two dimensions of the conjugal act are unitive and procreative. Maybe we'll talk about that too. What's the point of marriage? What is God asking you? What is God asking of you as you get married? Get them into heaven by giving him lots of opportunities to practice patience and forgiveness and all those things so you can become a saint? Well, probably the other way around, probably. Don't sell her short. Who can help them out? What's the point of marriage? Service? It would really help to know this when you get married, wouldn't it? Get your partner to heaven? What do you do in the meantime? What's that? Love and serve? Shocking.
Right. So the whole point of marriage is to image the relationship between Jesus and the church, not only to each other, but to the world.
Okay. So based on Ephesians 5, to image the relationship of Jesus and his church to each other and to the world. So we're in the middle of talking about the 7 what right now in the church? Sacraments. So we said the most basic thing you can say about a sacrament is that it is a what? A sacrament is a sign. Yeah. Right? But it's a particular kind of sign. Causes to happen what it signifies. What's the sign? What's the visible sign of marriage? Love. Safe guess. It's like Trivial Pursuit. John F. Kennedy. No? Kamchatka in Risk. What's the visible sign? Conjugal act's not all that physical. Hopefully it's not all that visible to everybody. So, shouldn't be. Keep the door closed and the blinds pulled. It's a family program. Love, help me out. Give me, No, grace of God is not visible. What's the visible thing? What is it that somebody can see? It's not the ring. And you're married. See, take notes, all right? What about the couple? Someone sees the couple. It's an awesome guess. No, John F. Kennedy. Man and woman together are alone, are in God's image and likeness, or together, only together, image God fully. Therefore, together they are the visible sign. No. It was an excellent attempt. What's the visible sign? Together we're more like God. That sounds, you guys are trying too hard. What love? Yeah, it's a visible sign. What am I seeing? So who's seeing it? Kathy, don't I have a meeting right now? You want Father Prentice? He's so much gentler. He's a kind priest. It's because he doesn't have to be pastor anymore. Everything gets so much easier. So take a couple who gets stranded on a desert island. They're married, so no one will ever see them. Is there a visible sign? To who? Yes. What if they don't have any children? To each other. Okay. So the visible sign is the other person. What's the invisible reality? Remember, it's a sign that points to something. What does it point to? What is it that a couple is asked and equipped to do in marriage? Serve each other. It's a good start. It's actually a bit more ambitious than that. No, this is the invisible reality. That's visible, to pour out your life. So here's my wife. She's a visible, she's remember the one definition of a sacrament, it's a concrete something you can bump into that has grace inside of it. So here's my wife. I can see her love for me. I can experience her love for me. What is the invisible reality? Nope, that's a purpose. It's not an invisible reality. God. We're making this way too complex. This is why a lot of people actually shouldn't get married. And John F. Kennedy. So we'll come at this another way. I'm not just going to tell you. I want you to tell yourself. So a couple sits down. I say, so why do you want to get married? And the answer almost inevitably is some version of Jerry Maguire, and you complete me. Which actually on one hand is a very good answer, but it's usually not the way they intend it. So I get that. I mean, I was almost married. I understand that answer. And yet at the same time, it usually means something like, I love what you do for me. Like, I love having you on my arm. I mean, you enhance my life, those kinds of things. When the correct answer is supposed to be, because out of all the people I've ever met in my life, I don't want to pour my life out for anybody like I want to pour my life out for you. And the paradox or the kicker in all this is, and yet in doing that, I find life. So the analogy would be something like Christmas, or the experience that applies this, maybe would be a better way to say it. Christmas comes and you've bought something for the person that you love. And it might be expensive, it might not, doesn't matter. But it's an attempt to communicate to them what you mean to me. And, love gifts and whatnot, personally. But I could care less about what you might have gotten me. I just want to see your face when you open what I got you. Why? Because it will be a way in which you will understand what you mean to me. Does that make sense? Right? So the paradox is, as we give our lives away, we find happiness. That's how you find happiness. That's one of the things that it means, we're going to see this week in rerouting, to be created in the image and likeness of God. Who's God? God's three. Three what? Three persons who live in this communion of, as somebody put it once, reckless love. Not reckless in the sense that it's careless, reckless in the sense that it holds nothing back. That's the image of the one you and I have been made in. Why is that so important? Because the only way, therefore, I can find happiness is to live like God. How does God live? He gives. That's what it means to love. To give until it hurts. And again, the paradox is, as I do that, I find life. So in marriage, what you're doing is you're saying to somebody else, I want to respond to God's invitation to me to surrender my life to you. And through the visible demonstration of my love, my kindness, my patience, my mercy, my generosity, my fidelity, all those things, to help you know who God is more tangibly. You get that? You shouldn't get married if that's not your intention. That's the point. So my dad dies a year ago. My mom and dad were married 66 years. So my mom can look at my dad's body in a casket and can say to him in all honesty, because of you, your mercy, your fidelity, your love, your generosity, your kindness, your steadfast, because of you, I know God. You've made him visible to me. That's the point of marriage, I would argue. Perhaps intentionally provocatively, but if marriage is a sacrament, and a sacrament is essentially a sign, then the visible sign is the love that a husband and a wife have for each other. I don't know what else it could be. Children are very important, but what happens to a couple who wants to get married, say, after the woman's past the age of menopause? Can they still get married in the church? Absolutely. They're not going to be children. So children, as important as they are, we're going to talk about children by all means and why they're so important. They can't be the essence of it. Otherwise, certain couples would never be allowed to get married in the church, and that's just not the case. You get that? Yeah? Now, that's the good news. Here's the bad news. You can't do that. Or maybe it was bad news. Like, oh no, I got to do that. So, I mean, who can do that, right? Like, my task is to somehow stand in the person of Christ, the high priest, and to serve as the good shepherd. You know, the game's up at this point, right, folks? Like, you realize that that's not me all the time. I can't do that on my own. I'm not strong enough to do that. So if you don't listen to this right now and kind of have some second thoughts and go, oh, that seems like it's a bit demanding, you're not hearing. Like, you should be going, we need to talk afterwards. But then the Lord says, don't worry, you're not on your own. If you were on your own, you're doomed. So there's grace given. So like when I was ordained, Father Prentice was ordained, Father John was ordained. When we were ordained, God gave us, he equipped us with what we needed and what we need to do it. Remember Peter Kraef's image when we were talking about sacraments at the very beginning? He used the image of faucets, how there's a relationship between grace and faith. So grace is something like the water that flows through the sewer line. It's always there. Faith is turning the faucet. I can open it a little bit, I can open it a lot, or I can keep it tightly shut. If I keep it tightly shut, grace doesn't flow. If I open it wide, you get wet. Okay? So every day, in my case, as a priest, or those of you who are married, every day in your case, grace is available to love like that, to do what it is that he's asked you to do. But if you're like me, some days the faucet's not only shut, it's shut pretty tight. You know, I go get the wrench and jerk it a few times. And then the Lord has to remind me, how you doing with that? How about we just let it trickle out again? So here's the quick summary of the good news of the gospel about marriage and family. What God calls a couple to do and what he called us to do at the very beginning of creation, which has been not ruined, but severely impaired as a result of sin, is still accessible to us. You can live this way. This is no small debate right now in the church. And it's a bit alarming, quite honestly. And it's causing a lot of confusion to people. And the way the debate is being kind of couched is something like, the image or the ideal that Jesus puts forth in the Gospels is just that. It's an ideal. And we really shouldn't expect people to be able to live up to that. Now, there's men and women in this room right now who've gone through the pain of divorce. I got divorced in my family. This has nothing to do with marriages that have failed. That's not the point at all. So we always want to be sensitive to the fact that the evil one just wants to try to accuse and jump on us and point a finger and put us into a hole. Don't go there. That's not at all what we're saying. All we're saying is that the gospel that Jesus speaks to us is not an ideal. It's a reality that I can live. Is it beyond my own power to live it? Absolutely. But I'm not on my own. So one of the things that's just impressed me more and more over the last set of years is, who here is married in the church? Who's here married in the last year? Yeah. Do you remember what happened after the Our Father? I know you were just so dreamy and caught up in sheer rapture and ecstasy that it's a memory right now. I mean, it's just, I get it, so don't worry about it. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Was anybody there who remembers what happened after the Our Father? What happens after the Our Father? Yeah, the nuptial blessing. What's a nuptial blessing? I'm sorry? It's actually, it's a bad name. It's so much more than a blessing. So the blessing is, so after the Our Father, in a Catholic wedding, in the celebration of the sacrament, the priest or the deacon, either from the altar or comes down to the couple, and he extends his hands over them. This is probably the prayer which is most analogous to when he extends his hands over bread and wine. Do the bread and wine get blessed? Say no. No. The bread and wine don't get blessed. They're changed. So the nuptial blessing is much more than a blessing. It's more like a consecration. It's the empowering of a couple to do what it is that God is asking them to do. That's the grace. Go make me visible to each other. Which is why it's so important to get it for when a couple gets married in the church, and this is why we do things like Alpha and whatnot as the first part of our marriage prep. If I don't know who Jesus is, how am I going to be able to do that? So I could have a natural marriage, right? So the church would look at a couple who's gotten married outside the church and say, that's a real marriage, if they aren't Catholic and whatnot. So, but a couple who's baptized, they're baptized and confirmed, they want to get married in the church. If I don't know who the Lord is, this is going to be nonsensical. And how many of us could don't raise your hands, but how many of us could testify to this? Like, when I got married, like, God was somewhere on the radar, but it certainly wasn't at the center. And certainly not the center for both of us. And then that causes challenges, right? Huge challenges. Not insurmountable, but huge challenges. And sometimes it leads to breaks. And so we're trying our part here from parish life, because I think the church has a lot to answer for the high divorce rate, because I think our marriage prep tends to be pathetic in most churches. Oh, you're in love. That's great. Come on in. Fill out some paperwork. You're going to have a great marriage. Why do you want to get married? I love him. And you? He loves me. Great. Beautiful. $500 here. He makes me laugh. Such depth, right? So here's the kicker. So in the Catholic Church, there's 7 sacraments, right? 3 of initiation, baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. 2 of healing, anointing, and reconciliation, and 2 of service. Marriage and priesthood. That's the first thing that's supposed to get your attention. Marriage is a sacrament of service. So if you were to ask me, hey, Father, why'd you want to be a priest? And I said, thought I'd get a lot out of it. Hopefully you'd go, really? Like, that's it? I go, yeah, well, what's wrong with that? I was looking for something a little bit nobler. You know, like, you love God, you want to serve his people, you want to pour your life out. No, just thought I'd get a lot out of it. And often that's couples don't say it that way, but that's their answer, right? That's what they're saying. I just love being with the other person. Really? You don't want to just pour yourself out in sacrifice? Nope, hadn't even occurred to me. All right. So if there's 7 sacraments and there's 2 of service, and it's marriage and priesthood, then the preparation, if these are parallel sacraments, then the preparation of one should look something like the preparation of the other. They don't remotely look alike. So I went to seminary at, 25. How old were you when you went to seminary? Chris, yeah. 22 right out of college? All right. So you had your degree in what? Theology? So I had a degree, was working for a few years, whatever. On my end, I was convinced God's called me to be a priest, which is great. It's kind of like proposing. She still has to say yes, right? So I proposed to the church, say, hi, I want to be a priest. They go, oh, really? Interesting. Why don't you come in and we'll talk? And so it took 6.5 years. So had to, what did I do? Got 3 degrees, learned 3 more languages, moved to another country. Oh, and then had my life just ripped to shreds by people who told me every annoying thing that I did. So I haven't changed, but I'm aware of how I come off. Most of you aren't, but we are. Like, I know the things that I do that drive people nuts. I used to think, like, what's wrong with you? You just don't understand me. I came to understand, no, everybody understands me really well. So that's called formation, where somebody's responsibility is to just constantly tell you, John, you do these things, and they come off poorly, and they're annoying, and I'm telling you that out of love because they're a hindrance to the gospel getting proclaimed, and you need to know it, and you need to be aware of it. You just don't understand me. Oh, yeah, I do. So that's what you go through for 6.5 years. At the end of it, we get ordained. And we're going to ask you to go on a weekend. Fill out some paperwork. Maybe even an all-day retreat. You got to be kidding. Between these 2 sacraments, which one do you think is more difficult? Yours. You know why? 2 selfish persons. In mine, only one. When there's a problem, it's me, right? Lord, you're wrong. Oh, shoot, creator of the universe, right? Sorry. So when something goes wrong, it's always with me, right? The problem is me. In your relationship, the problem is both of you. Sometimes more intensely than the other, right? It's always you, Dave. Right? So there's no way the preparation that we've been offering to couples over the years has been just. You know, justice is to give somebody what they're due. We haven't given couples what they're due at all. And so the challenge, as you guys see right now, is we're trying to find a marriage prep which is both helpful, informative, and not crushing, right? Because there's so much to try to offer. So, long way into this discussion, but tonight's more a conversation than it is anything else. I want to look at a bunch of scriptures with us, but I think the moment that you recognize, the moment that a couple understands, what is it that God is asking of me? Everything begins to change. Until I know that, Dr. Janet Smith, some of you know Janet, she's a professor at Sacred Heart. She was giving a talk one time, and somebody, I think in a Q&A, raised the question about marriage and happiness. And she looked at her, she goes, whoa. You thought marriage was about happiness? No. Marriage isn't about happiness. Marriage is about holiness. She went, oh. So, because we're so, this is where the fall comes in our lives, right? Even though I know I find life by giving, I still fight it like crazy. Still. Even though you know life comes from giving, you fight it. So who went down to PBJ to work downtown with the homeless when RCIA went down? So some of us have gone down, huh? So every Saturday morning, group of folks go downtown. Either it's food or it's food and clothing. Spend a couple of hours downtown, and it's an extraordinary encounter with Jesus and his distressing disguise in the poor. Inevitably, people, they come, they're like, gosh, why did I sign up for this? What time is it? It's 6 a.m. It's Saturday morning. It's my one day in the week to sleep in. Okay, I'll go. They go, they come back. I don't know if they got anything out of that, but I got a ton out of that. That's the experience you have when you work with people, when you serve in any kind of way. And you come back and you go, wow, that was amazing. You get another opportunity and you go, I don't think I want to do that again. Why? Because I'm selfish as all get out. And so I fight that. Guy gave a mission here. Bob and Marion probably remembered. It was like the first or second year I was here. He was telling a story about when he was like just out of college. He's dating this woman. I think they lived in New York. She was from North Carolina. It's like 4 p.m. one day. They're out doing some shopping or something. She gets a call. Her dad is sick. He says, I turned to her. I says, why don't we just go down and see him right now? She says, what do you mean? He goes, just hop in the car. I'll drive you down. You'll drive me down right now? Yeah, why not? You'd do that? Absolutely. Why wouldn't I do that? I love you. So they get in the car. They drive down. 3-4 years go by. They're sitting there watching a movie or something in the living room. He gets up, walks to the kitchen, like put a glass in the sink. She says, hey, while you're up, would you mind just getting me a Coke out of the fridge? Your leg's broken? You can't get up and get it? And it hit him. He's like, whoa, 3 years ago, I'm like, you want to drive 12 hours? I'll drive you down to North Carolina. And now all of a sudden, I'm like, I won't even do this. Here. Like, what happened? So love just kind of, it shrinks if I don't keep working on it. If I don't keep being intentional about trying to find ways to pour out myself to the other. Is this ringing any bells with anybody? Yeah? Maybe not. You guys are all too holy. I mean, I can remember having I was ordained like 2 years. I'm in a massive parish about the size of this. We had there was a pastor who was just a great man. He was like 40 years older than me. We had another guy with us who was a really good man. Maybe it was a bad week for him. He didn't feel like doing a lot of work. And we had like 5 funerals that week. To grieve with people and to walk with them is rather exhausting, as you would imagine, especially when you're the person leading funerals. So I did the first 4. 5th one comes in, and interiorly I just go, surely, like Father K has given us to so-and-so. So we used to just have this little piece of paper, out in the kind of the foyer of our house, and he would have the liturgical schedule. There's a pen in here somewhere. And he would just write initials on there for, who had the mass, who had the funeral. So I happened to be walking by one night, and I see my initials on it, and I go berserk interiorly. I'm like... So I walk into his room, and I go, what's this? And he says, what? I go, what's this? He goes, what? I go, I'm doing the next funeral too? He goes, yeah. I said, why isn't so-and-so doing it? He goes, he didn't think you'd mind. He didn't think I'd mind? Yeah. I go, what's he doing? I don't know. He hasn't done a thing all week. I know, but will you do it? Yeah, I'll do it. Fine. So funeral comes. Funeral comes, and I am livid inside, right? Outward, I am just, oh, I am so sorry. May the Lord watch over you. Yeah. And I have a volcano erupting inside. And I mean, this is like 18 years ago, and I can remember it like it was this morning. I can remember preaching, and it's the same struggle. Like, please God, what was coming out of my mouth was in my heart, because in my heart was shooting darts at this guy, if not worse. Get done, walk down, they bring up the gifts, and I can remember this like it was 2 minutes ago. The person gives the gifts to me, and I hear God say, what is your problem? You love this. You love to do this. What are you complaining about? What would you rather be doing? Playing Miss Pac-Man? And something just broke. And it was almost like at that moment, I think I experienced what until then had been a line, which is that the human person only finds fulfillment by making a sincere gift of self. It had been a line in a textbook for me until then. But suddenly it became reality. And as the Lord just confronted me on it and called me on it, I recognized the truth of what he was saying. Sure enough, I love to give. I still complain like crazy, even though it's usually interiorly or out loud to Kathy. But I love to give. And so do you. It's how you're wired. It's how you're made. It's what you're made for. And if you're married, then you're wired and equipped and qualified to pour your life out in a reckless way for your spouse. And the whole beauty of the Christian life is, it might be the case that you walked in here tonight unwilling to do that. But God can change it like that. Because that's what grace does. Grace conquers hearts and changes lives. Makes it possible for me to go from walking in this direction to this direction. So someone asked, are we going to talk about Genesis? So here's the shortened version of the understanding of marriage as it was created, right? So remember we're going to look this Sunday. Flip to Genesis 2. We did this at the very beginning of RCIA. We're going to do it again this coming week in the second story of creation. So chapter 2, starting in verse 18. So it's 18 to 25. The Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. So out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all the cattle, and to the birds of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for the man there was not found a helper fit for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Then the man said, this one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. I don't want to go through this again like we did at the beginning, and we're going to do it again somewhat in depth this coming Sunday. Let's just state the couple essential things about this, about how it once was. So there really was a time, when man and woman lived in perfect harmony with each other. So man does not speak in the scriptures until woman stands in front of him. And whereas he names the animals and it shows ownership of the animals or lordship over the animals, that's not at all what's happening with the woman, because he doesn't even name himself until he names her, which is to say he doesn't understand who he is until she's there. And so the woman stands in front of him, and without ever uttering a word, just by being there in front of him, she says to the man by her presence, I'm what you're made for. I'm made to love and to be loved by you. And he knows it. That's the whole point of they were naked and knew no shame. You and I don't have any idea what that is. That ended with the fall. Nakedness without shame. Naked without shame means there was a real time when men and women were able to gaze upon each other and there was no sense of use, objectification, exploitation, domination, desiring to be dominated. Only a woman could say this. I heard a woman say it once. A man's temptation is lust. A woman's temptation is to be lusted after. Only a woman could say that. But there was a time when that didn't mean anything. There was just this incredible communion between the two of them. I know I'm made to give myself to you, and you're made to give yourself to me. And we're going to find happiness that way. And we're gifts to each other from God. So take my hand and let's go. That's over. Over in the sense of it's a struggle now to overcome. So what happens? The fall happens, right? We're going to look at this in 2 weeks in rerouting. Soon as the man and the woman eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which we'll spend plenty of time explaining soon, what do? Their eyes are opened and they realize that they are naked. And so they make clothes for themselves. Why? Because all of a sudden the gaze that you used to look at me with, that ain't the same gaze. What is that look? Because now I feel threatened, used, objectified. And so we hide. Right? And that's been the whole history of the relationship between men and women ever since. More or less, men doing most of the exploiting and women doing most of the conniving and being exploited. Sometimes it's the other way around, but hear that, right? Both people are guilty. I can't tell you, as somebody who's spent most of my life doing marriage counseling, how many guys use their wives and how many wives allow themselves to be used so that they can get from their husbands what they want. That ain't the way God intended it to be. And it's not the way it was. But that's commonplace, unfortunately. And it's all the more commonplace if I don't know who Jesus is and I don't understand the point of marriage. So sure enough, they rebel, they clothe themselves. God comes to the man. What'd you do? What happened? What's he do? A minute ago, it was bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Now it's like the woman you gave me. It's her fault. I would have been fine. She gave me this thing to eat. And all of a sudden, they start to play the blame game. And then, chapter 3, verse 16, all of a sudden comes this incredible disharmony in the relationship between men and women. To the woman, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule it over you. This peaceful, tranquil relationship which used to be there is gone. That's the devastating effect of the fall. Flip, though, to Matthew 19. So Matthew 19 is a conversation that Jesus is having with different religious leaders of his time. So at the time of the Lord, there's divorce is allowed, and its grounds, there's a rigorous view and there's kind of a less rigorous view. The rigorous view is the only grounds, and it's only the man who can divorce his wife. The rigorous view is if she's committed adultery, I can divorce her. The less rigorous view is she's a horrible cook. I mean, come on. I can divorce her. And they would say that. So she's a bad cook, not what I signed up for, I'm out of here. Okay, that's great. That's the lax view, and it was accepted by some people. So the people come to Jesus, and they go, what do you think? Which one of these is it? That's the background that we just don't know, or we don't get from the text. So they come to, in verse 3, the Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? And he answered, have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female? So what's he doing? He's pointing back to Genesis. And he said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. Quick thing on this. This is really important. What does it mean to leave your father and your mother? What's it mean? To leave your father and your mother, be joined to your wife, and to become one flesh. What's that mean to you? This is a patriarchal culture. This guy isn't moving anywhere. What's it mean to leave your father and mother? What's it mean that you guys are about to do this? What's it mean to leave your father and mother? Do you understand what it means to leave your father and your mother? What's that? Exactly. I establish a new center of my life. That's no small thing. Doesn't mean you disown your family. It means I have a new center of my life. That's what I'm called to do. You now, after God, are the most important thing in my life, the most important person in my life. When I know that to be true, I'm safe. When I don't know that that's true, I'm not safe. If I'm not safe, this is not a good relationship. Right? We know this. So, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. And then the Word of God comments on the Word of God. What, therefore, God has joined together, man must not separate. They said to him, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away? He said to them, for your hardness of heart. Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. What's he doing here? Here's what John Paul says. St. John Paul II. In responding the way that Jesus does, in pointing back to Genesis, what he's saying is, though we don't live in a time where we're naked without shame anymore, that's clear. Though the fall is a reality that you and I live in, though sin is a reality in our lives, though what we call concupiscence, how that inclination to be selfish is omnipresent in me, I can overcome that. That's the good news about marriage. What we once did naturally in Eden before the fall, we still somehow have access to by grace. That's the good news about marriage. You can live this way. This is not an ideal. This is possible. You can be great. Now, I don't know about you, but as noble as that sounds sometimes, that does not help me. Because I'm looking for every excuse I can find to not be great in my selfishness. That's why I can't stand the saints. I love them, rely on them like no end, but they just remind me what I'm capable of. And I'm capable of more than I do and more than I am. And so are you. Why am I not a saint yet? I just don't want to be. Why are you not a saint yet? You don't want to be. Father Prentice was talking about confession a couple weeks ago. So, someone will walk into confession, I just never do this, but man, I've just been slandering my husband for the last month. I mean, I'm not that kind of person, but I've just been talking about him and arguing with him. It's what do you mean you're not that kind of person? You're exactly that kind of person. Of course you are. You just did these things. Well, it's not who I am. Yeah, it is. We just have this amazing inability to look at ourselves, right? I don't do these things, but I just did them. What's wrong with you? Do you understand the words coming out of your mouth? This is called the need to repent. That's just how broken we are, right? And we're all in the same boat. I mean, me more than anybody. That's why it's great to be a herald of God's mercy, because I need it probably more than anybody in the room. So it's easy to give, or it should be anyway. So now keep going, because here's the kicker on this. So for your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for, and then here comes this bizarre word that gets translated lots of different ways. Some people have translated unchastity, infidelity. The word is porneia in Greek. The Aramaic word is zenut. Zenut is an unlawful union. So this becomes a controversial question for lots of people. This is where the whole reality of an annulment or a declaration of nullity comes in the church. So what's Jesus saying? Is there an exception to his teaching on divorce? His answer is no. There's not. So whoever divorces his wife except for unchastity and marries another commits adultery. And he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So again, divorce in my family. I've worked on 2 annulments from one of my sisters. Work on tons of annulments. So people go through divorce, right? It's a reality. The question then becomes, was the marriage I was in, was it a sacramental union? And often, so in other words, did we know what we were doing? Did we enter into a total partnership of life? Did we have the intention to be faithful? Did we have the intention to really share everything with each other, to be one flesh, which doesn't mean to have sex with each other, it means to be one flesh, to have a total union. And oftentimes, the reality is we really didn't. And so the church makes a decision on that. So oftentimes people think an annulment is something like, it sounds like a verb. So, here's the piece of paper, there's something written all over it, and we're going to erase it now. We're going to annul it. When in fact what a declaration of nullity is something more like, there really wasn't ever anything on the page to begin with. Sacramentally. Something of the essence of the sacrament of marriage was lacking. Doesn't have anything to do with children, whether or not they were legitimate. It's striking to me how in a country where more than half the children born are born out of wedlock, the only time that becomes an issue is when people start talking about annulments. But it has nothing to do with children. It just means that there was something of the essence of the sacrament that was lacking. And if that's the case, then what I was in, though it might have been a legal marriage, it wasn't a sacramental marriage. So the person isn't eligible to get married again. The person's eligible to marry. Does that make sense? That causes confusion, I know, to people lots of times.
So an annulment is saying that the marriage never took place.
It was not a real sacramental bond. Yeah. There was something of the essence of this. So somebody might have intended to simulate a marriage, but they might have entered into it deceitfully. They might have entered into it unable to actually be faithful. They might have entered into it unwilling to be faithful. They might have entered into it under coercion. I can think of a friend of mine who, the night of her wedding, called her sister and says, "What do you do when you know you just married the wrong guy?" I can't tell you how often I hear that. That's why before every wedding, I sit down with the bride and the groom alone and I say, "You want to do this?" Because I got no problem going out right now and telling everybody, "Hey, we just got a lot of food and we're going to have a nice party, but there's no wedding right now." Because once you get engaged, not except for you guys, you're it's like a done deal. Like the motions, and we've spent so much money. And I hear that all the time. Couples that I've prepped who say that. No, but lack of form is a different thing than a declaration of nullity. There's two different things. One has to do with a marriage which involved one of the parties which was Catholic, but it didn't happen in a Catholic church. That's the lack of form. Declaration of nullity is when it was a marriage which took place either in the church, they were Catholics, or it was two other baptized, or two other persons, they got married in another church, or in another place, doesn't matter. Okay? So I'm sorry? For a declaration of nullity, if they're not Catholic, yep. The church will recognize as a valid marriage. So here's I only know how to be blunt, right? So Father Prentice is really gentle and kind. I'm going to be blunt and direct. When you got married, the church's presumption was you meant what you said. And you knew what you were doing. The reality, of course, and increasingly so in the culture that we're living in, like who has an accurate understanding of marriage and living in our culture? Of course couples live together, right? Like everybody they know lives together. Of course they're sexually active. Everybody they know is sexually active. That's not an excuse, and don't do that. Why not do it? Don't do it because sex says something to the other person. When I'm sexually active with somebody, I'm saying to you, everything I have is yours. That's either true or it's not. If you're not married, it's not true. You might want it to be true, but it's a lie. So given all the pressures that we live in and all the confusion that's in our culture about marriage, of course people are messed up on it, right? I came from a broken family. I'm not going to marry somebody before I know who they are. We're going to live together first. Sounds like a reasonable thing to do. It's not. As Tim Keller says, because you're always auditioning when you're living with somebody. It's a great way to think about it. I always have to be my best. But you ain't going to be your best when you're married. Not all the time. Maybe not even most of the time. So here's the point I wanted to say. Look at verse 10. You know what the disciples' response to this is? This is, talk about realism, right? The disciples' response is, if this is the case, it's better not to marry. No one catches this. I think it's hysterical. Wait a minute, one man, one woman for life? You got to be kidding. No. We'll find other arrangements. So the Lord's telling us that on our own, we can't do this, but we're not on our own. And that's the good news of marriage. Conversely, it's the good news of priesthood, too. I can tell you countless priests, friends of mine, who've kind of wandered away, stopped living the way they know they should be living. God can break into their life any moment. You just have to turn around, stop, surrender. Just like a married couple. Stop, turn around, surrender. There's obviously lots of different directions we could have gone tonight. So, as always, want to refer people to the Catechism. But because we have so many talks online about marriage and whatnot, and because we're going to get into more of this this coming Sunday, and then next Wednesday when we do the deeper dive for rerouting, I hope this isn't a waste of time tonight. I want to look at one last passage, and then we'll see if anybody's got any questions. Flip to Luke chapter 20. Starting in verse 27. Luke 20, starting in verse 27. So there's a group of leaders at the time of Jesus known as the Sadducees. The Sadducees only accept as inspired texts the first 5 books of the Bible. They come to Jesus Jesus is always trying to get trapped, right? So, or they're always trying to trap Jesus. So they come to him with this question. So they deny that there's a resurrection. So there's a pretty healthy debate at the time of Jesus as to whether or not there's any such thing as a resurrection of the dead. Some people believe there is, some people don't believe there is, amongst the Jews. So they reject that there's a resurrection. They reject it because they don't think there's any evidence of it in the first 5 books of the Bible. So they come to him and they say in verse 28, "Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, having a wife but no children, the man must take the wife and raise up children for his brother." That sounds like a really kind of barbaric thing, especially for women in our day and age. Like, wow, like I got the short end of the stick on that. Like, you die and you got a brother and he's going to marry me. Wow, how noble. It actually is primarily, it's called the Levirate law, and it is primarily for the protection of the woman, is the reason behind that. Why? Because you can't just go get a job. There are no jobs. You're a widow in an agrarian community, and you have no one to protect you. And so it's not because you were your husband's property, and now he's dead, he's got a brother, and now you're his property. It's because you are desperately in need because of the culture, and so someone is going to protect you, and so the brother would marry you. That might sound like a bit much for us, but that's the basis of the law. Now there were 7 brothers. The first took a wife and died without children. The second and the third took her, and likewise all 7 left no children and died. Afterward, the woman also died. So here's the snarky little comment, right? So in the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had her as wife. And Jesus said to them, "The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are accounted worthy to attain to that age and to the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, for they cannot die anymore, because they are equal to angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection." They don't become angels. That's important. Why I want to look at this. Just want to look at this real quick to say that sometimes this causes confusion for people when you say that in marriage there is, or in heaven there is no marriage. Some people jump up and down for joy. Other people kind of lament and weep and wail, but there is no marriage in heaven. Why? Because why? Oh, yeah, you are a physical body. We believe in the resurrection of the body. Don't feel bad about it. I remember I worked with a woman for years in the church who walked into my office one day after she'd gotten like a boatload of advanced degrees in theology, and she says, "I am really embarrassed right now, but I have to tell you, I just realized that we actually believe that we're going to have a resurrected body in heaven. Can I still work here?" Yeah, you're going to have a body in heaven. Absolutely. You're not a spirit. You're a body. Why is there no marriage in heaven? No procreation? United with God? What's that mean? There's no love of neighbor in heaven? You're backpedaling. Uh-oh. Sounded like it. Why is there no marriage in heaven? There are people in heaven. That was a stunning realization for me when I woke up one day and realized I'm going to have to engage with other people in heaven. That was just going to be me and Jesus. I thought, oh my gosh, I got to talk to other people. They're thinking, I got to talk to him? You're here? No, I meant that's what they'd say to me. Why is there no marriage in heaven? Sacrament is an earthly thing. What is a sacrament? The essence of a sacrament is to be a sign, right? So in heaven, the sign is fulfilled. If I'm a sign of God's love, called to be, and I have God, so you're kind of on, and I have the real thing, I don't need a sign anymore. This does not mean you won't know each other. It doesn't mean you won't love each other. You'll actually love each other more in heaven than you ever did on earth. because the love will be purified. It just means that the sign is no longer necessary once I'm home. You get that?